Hello and welcome everybody to the Tournament Center. I am Paul Chen, joined here by Hall of Famer and Pro Tour Journey to Next champion Patrick Chapin with a unique take on a deck that's been around in Standard, Approach of the Second Sun, but not what you might think. We are playing red-white approach. Now, why red-white approach?
A combination of the ability to use Chandra to accelerate approach out and just play approach on turn 5.
Okay.
And then just the cheap red removal, having access to things like a Braid and Lightning Strike to be able to help you bridge to some of the white control cards.
Okay, and now heading into the tournament, you know, when you played this deck, what were the decks that you were looking to beat with this strategy?
So the version I was playing actually was really well set up against various control decks, and then a lot of decks you can just win game one because of how difficult approach is for people to interact with. But the main thing I was focusing on and testing was just energy matchups, you know, just being able to be prepared for the energy matchups.
Yeah, pretty good read on the format given that I was 50% of the field. Now moving in, of course, 3 copies of Approach of the Second Sun. So when you kind of fiddle with the numbers, why do you come up with 3 as the proper number?
Once you have Sunbirds Invocation in your deck, you're a lot less, even though it's so good to approach into another approach, you're less reliant on finding the approach because of how quickly you can cycle through your deck and just take over the game. I guess, yeah, with the approach of with the Sunbirds Invocation.
Yeah, I guess, yeah, that's a card that we'll touch on briefly, but Sunbirds Invocation, spice a little new addition to this deck. Moving on here, we have our Planeswalker package here, 4 copies of Gideon of the Trials and 4 copies of Chandra, Torch of Defiance. Now tell us a little bit about the Gideon of the Trials.
So Gideon provides some much needed early defense. Like early on, it sort of locks down an opposing threat, which can include an opposing Chandra or some other Planeswalker, not just a creature, but you basically want to get them to have to overcommit so that the numerous sweepers like Fumigates and Sweltering Suns can get a lot more creatures at once.
Yeah, it's also a nice cheap way to deal with Hazoret, right?
Absolutely. I mean, this deck has an extensive number of ways to interact with Hazoret just because of how much the Scarab God and Hazoret are such powerful defining forces. This deck has a lot of ways to try to interact with those. Now, Gideon obviously isn't the most for the Scarab God, but for Hazoret and for a number of the other most difficult threats to deal with, Gideon is just very versatile and then provides a victory condition against people who don't have the threat to lock down anymore.
Right, right. And then we have, of course, Chandra. Don't really have to talk too much about why this card is great, but like you said, ramping into Approach of the Second Sun and Sunbirds Invocation.
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And just the one thing with the Approach mirror match, if you have Gideon, they can't win with Approach anymore. You just get
Gideon
the emblem.
yes. Right? Nice. All right, so we talked about the sweepers here. Can you talk a little bit about the sweepers here and the Ixalan's binding we got here?
Yeah, I mean, Sweltering Suns and Fumigate are particularly good in a format where people have to play Whirler Virtuoso, or they're playing so many threats like Whirler Virtuoso that can be multiple bodies. The Ixalan's binding, however, a fantastic new addition, making it so that not only did you get the Scarab God, you can stop future ones from coming down. And it's just like whether you're hitting the Scarab God or if you hit Torrential Gearhulk from a blue-black control deck, they are going to have a lot of difficulty winning.
Right, because they don't really have a way to get it off the board. So while it might seem a little bit clunky, it does just give you a little bit of that insurance, right?
Yeah, and I can't tell you how often Ixalan's binding something like a Rogue Refiner, and then they just have another one in their hand. And
that's the worst feeling in the world for sure.
So strong, yeah.
Okay, so now we got the sweepers. Let's move on to the spot removal here. We've got 4 copies of Cast Out, 3 Braids, 1 Lightning Strike, and 3 Settle the Wreckage. What's up with the split here?
So I generally like a Braid more than Lightning Strike, but usually you don't need multiple Braids, other than for like a gate, other than the Gate to the Afterlife, God Pharaoh's Gift type of decks. Generally, if you had one of each, it's you can get what you need out of the Lightning Strike, but it also gives you an added dimension for a little bit of extra insurance against like a Chandra or a Vraska Ultimate.
Okay.
You know.
And then we have Cast Out and Settle the Wreckage. What about these cards?
Cast Out, giving you answers to everything. Without having counterspells in the deck, you need to have a very robust selection of answers to be able to interact with the threats, and the opportunity cost is just so low because of the cycling. Settle the Wreckage is a fantastic new card that functions like a sweeper in many ways. The ability to exile when attacking the Scarab God or a Hazoret makes it a very, very, very powerful complement to the removal package. That you're giving them a bunch of basic land often doesn't matter that much because eventually you're just going to cast Approach anyway and try to win that way.
Right, makes a lot of sense. All right, moving on, we have a couple of cool new cards here from Ixalan. We have 2 copies of Treasure Map and 3 copies of Sunbirds Invocation. How many people have had to pick this card up and read it when you cast it against them?
Only one of my opponents did.
Really? Oh, okay. I was just like, only one.
No, only one did not.
Okay.
Yeah, Sunbirds Invocation, it's a very powerful card draw engine because all your spells are basically giving you 2 copies, but you're also getting a diverse mix of threats. You're getting, your Chandra finds a Gideon. You're finding you can just overwhelm people with card advantage, but also if you just cast an Approach of the Second Sun, it's super powerful. You look at 7 cards, and if you find another Approach, you win on the spot because the second Approach resolves first, so the Approach that you cast from your hand is technically the second one to resolve.
So it's an instant win? If
you just win immediately.
Wow,
Absolutely.
That is awesome. And then the Treasure Map, just a little extra value?
Treasure Map smooths your... I think Treasure Map is, even now, a very underrated card that we're going to see a lot of over the next couple of years. The ability to smooth out your draws early on, and then later switch into a card draw engine, or in the case of a deck like this, getting 3 treasures right out the gate lets you play Approach really fast. You play this on turn 3 and use it, turn 4, then turn 5 you just win on the spot because you have exactly enough to be able to Approach with all the treasures.
Wow, that is pretty ridiculous. So yeah, this deck looks pretty awesome. Finishing out the deck, of course, we have the non-basic lands. We got Inspiring Vantage, of course. No more creature lands in the format.
Unnecessary
4 copies of Stone Quarry and 2 copies of Field of Ruin. So now why the Field of Ruin here?
So Field of Ruin is primarily a way to interact with things like Azcanta. Once you flip to search for Azcanta, or when you flip Vance's Blasting Cannons, any of those type of non-basics. But it also, the mana is relatively easy, so you've got a little bit of opportunity to use a few lands that do something.
Right. You had the Stone Quarries just fixing your mana perfectly after all. So.
Yes.
All right, and then of course, rounding out the deck, we have our basics and the Evolving Wilds. Now, we don't have this up on the slide, but you did want to talk briefly about your sideboard plan. What kind of spice did you have in your sideboard?
So it's almost entirely creatures.
Okay.
But the sweetest one, I mean, Glorybringer was really important, but the 2 coolest, and they were just amazing how well they worked out, was Tocatli Honor Guard.
What does that card do?
And Captain Lannery Storm. So Tocatli Honor Guard is 1 and a white for a 1/3 from Ixalan that makes it so that creatures entering the battlefield don't trigger abilities. And so if you just put it out on turn 2 against an energy deck, the Whirler Virtuoso, the Bristling Hydra, Servant, the Conduit, none of them make energy. The Rogue Refiner doesn't even draw cards. It's like a Solemnity that's even cheaper, plus it can block for you. It's a totally reasonable form of interaction against a red aggro deck too, because or Shaker Kenra doesn't trigger, and it can block all the different creatures.
Wow, that's some pretty nice tech. And you said you had Captain Lannery Storm.
Captain Lannery Storm was excellent as well. Captain Lannery Storm providing additional ways to attack Planeswalkers, press and attack against people who board out. They're going to board out most of their removal, and very often the removal they have isn't going to line up right against it. If you play a captain, like for instance, on turn 2, you Lightning Strike or Abrade their Longtusk Cub, untap, drop Captain Lannery Storm and attack. Not only have you put pressure on them, but you now have on turn 4 a Glorybringer ahead of schedule, or you just basically you can keep building an advantage that way, and the mana advantage is so often what it ends up being about after sideboarding.
Okay, well. It's really nice to see a refreshing new approach to Standard. A lot of different decks you can play. Red-White approach being another thing that you can try out. For Patrick Chapin and myself, Paul Cheon, this was Red-White approach here at Pro Tour Ixalan.